When it comes to Jason Voorhees, the first thing that probably comes to our mind the moment we hear the name is the mask. The iconic hockey mask in particular. But here's the thing, Voorhees didn't always wear the hockey mask. But when he did, it was a game changer for the horror genre. Jason Voorhees has been around for decades, and over the years, his face covering evolved from the burlap sack to the battle-worn slasher royalty symbol. This hockey mask became his branding, a crucial part of his character. And of course, pure nightmare fuel. Even Jason's mask tells its own tale, and today we'll be learning about that story. So join us as we break down every iteration to find out how the mask ended up becoming the face of fear. The Baghead Killer, Friday the 13th, Part 2, 1981. Even though Jason is who we associate with the Friday the 13th franchise, when he first took center stage, he was not the way we remember him. There was no iconic hockey mask covering his face. Instead, we got this raw and animalistic version of the character wearing a dirty burlap sack with only one eye hole cut out. This baghead version of Jason was a far cry from who we now know him as, but the simplicity of the whole thing was enough to terrify audiences. Now you might be wondering, why the sack? Well, the director of Part 2, Steve Miner, and his creative team knew that after the success of the first part, they would need to get into Pamela Voorhees' legacy and build upon it without repeating it beat for beat. This time around, the killer is Jason, and they want to keep him grounded but also mysterious. This led to them choosing the burlap sack. This sack had two purposes. On the one hand, it was a very practical disguise for Jason as he went around targeting promiscuous young adults, and on the other hand, it reminded people of real-world killers like the Phantom Killer from the town that dreaded sundown, who also wore a sack with eye holes. Creepy, isn't it? This visual connection amplified the creep factor, as you can guess, and added a layer of dark realism to the otherwise gritty lore of Jason, making him more primal in nature instead of paranormal. The aesthetic of this sack also played a huge role in the visual storytelling. It's unsophisticated and primal, both of which are true for Jason. But it also shows that Jason is completely separated from society as a whole. He is a man who lived in isolation and grew up in the woods after his supposed drowning as a child. His outfit is just as crude, with a simple plaid shirt, overalls, and a bag over his head. If that doesn't scream reclusive, I don't know what else would. When you look at Jason in this costume, not once do you think, oh, a costume designer designed this for him. Instead, you believe that Jason probably found these clothes in the woods, and that's what the director wanted us to feel. He looks like a child dressing up as an adult, hoping to get his revenge. And with the sack having one eye hole instead of two, Jason looks even more unstable, angry, and unbalanced. While it's true that in this movie we get glimpses of Jason's face, whatever we see in those fleeting moments simply reinforces the idea that he's a tragic and deformed figure. The burlap sack on his head was not just hiding his identity, but also hiding his pain. In one scene near the end, we see the mask removed from Jason, and this scene is treated with sympathy and revulsion. The filmmakers clearly were not ready to turn Jason into the full-blown slasher icon we know him as. They were simply building his myth piece by piece. This sack ended up becoming memorable, much to everyone's surprise. In the later versions of Jason, the mask would get more and more stylized. However, the burlap mask always tapped into that primal fear of faceless intruders and rural horrors. The Jason in Friday the 13th Part 2 is closer to Leatherface from Texas Chainsaw Massacre than to supernatural horror. This version of Jason was grounded in reality and felt human, made of flesh and blood and fueled by rage and spite. He was unpredictable. He could stumble. He could bleed. And yet, he was relentless, and that's what made him so iconic. Behind the scenes, actor-stuntman Steve Dash and Warrington Gillett brought Jason to life with this clumsy brutality. In the later films, Jason moves with a robotic menace, but here he charges head first, and sometimes quite literally. There's this desperation and frantic quality in the Baghead Jason that we don't see in the other movies. You don't see him showing up like a stalker out of nowhere in this movie. Instead, you hear him crash through the windows and run across the room like a wild animal. The sack mask may not be the most iconic, but it set the foundations for what Jason could become. He was a killer defined by the mask he wore, the fear he inspired, and the history he carried with him. His change in style from the initial burlap sack to a high-tech mask showed us that Jason could evolve, and it reminded us that, sometimes, it's the low-tech terrors that you should be afraid of. Friday the 13th Part 2 is often overshadowed by whatever we got after it, but the iconic nature of the baghead Jason enticed many generations of fans and eventually gained a cult following. It was so loved that eventually, in the 2009 Friday the 13th, we get a quick glimpse of the baghead Jason until he puts on the hockey mask. Horror has to start somewhere, and for Jason, that somewhere was a sack and a single eye watching you from the dark. Birth of the Hockey Mask, Friday the 13th Part 3, 1982. The baghead Jason was so popular that Jason was brought back to life again in the third installment of the franchise. However, Part 3 of the franchise did not just bring him back to life. This also gave him a face that we would never forget. In Friday the 13th Part 3, Jason dons a simple white goalie mask and becomes one of the most recognizable horror icons in cinema history. Until this movie, Jason's look has been mostly improvised on the spot. It had a bit of roughness to it. However, now, he had his own identity, cold, iconic, and unemotional. But here's the best part. The mask was not even part of the original plan. You see, during production, the filmmakers needed a way to hide Jason's face because they ditched the whole baghead thing on a whim. That's when 3D effects supervisor Martin J. Sadoff stepped up. He was a huge hockey fan and offered up a Detroit Red Wings goalie mask. The team used that as a test and liked the look. So they added a few tweaks, like making it bigger and adding the red chevrons, and voila! History was made. The backup option ended up becoming the face of the franchise. Jason doesn't put the mask on until halfway through the movie. Until that point, he did not have a clear identity. But the moment he killed Shelley and took his hockey gear, Jason became the walking death machine with a lethal game face. Gone was the hillbilly ghoul. This shift was subtle, but it was seismic. Everything changed for the better. The mask of the third part is pristine, white, symmetrical, and clean. It doesn't have the grime or decay on it, which the later versions do, but somehow this suited Part 3 a lot. You see, this movie leaned heavily into the gimmicky 3D effects, and Jason's clean look somehow matched the tonal shift. The movie was campy, no question about that, but the mask added a level of menace as it turned Jason into a blank canvas of brutality. Richard Brooker played Jason in this entry. His tall frame and deliberate movements made Jason an imposing character. When you add the mask on top of that, it helps accentuate this. Since there were no facial expressions to read, the camera focused completely on the body language, and every step, every turn, and every minute movement felt like a death sentence. The mask was a visual masterpiece as it stood out from the drab surroundings. The simplicity of the mask made it easy for fans to recognize Jason even in silhouette. And since this was a hockey mask, it separated Jason from Michael Myers and his Captain Kirk mask and Leatherface and his skin mask. In pop culture, this hockey mask ended up becoming a sign of horror. You didn't even need to show Jason anymore on the poster. One ominous shot of the mask on a poster, and chills would immediately go down the audience's spines. This hockey mask became so embedded in horror iconography that even non-horror fans started to recognize it. Part 3 of the Friday the 13th franchise didn't offer much in terms of character development in the story. However, it was the movie that gave us the most important visual milestone. This was the moment when Jason became Jason. And while the later entries would age, reimagine, and damage the mask, they always used this hockey mask as the base, the clean and cold, inhuman face that started the journey. Damage and Decay, Parts 4 through 6, the final chapter of Jason's lives. In 1984, we got Friday the 13th, The Final Chapter, which, despite its title, is the fourth installment of Jason's adventures. It had been 2 years since the addition of the hockey mask, and well, by the time this movie showed up in theaters, Jason was already the face of the franchise. And this face was starting to wear. The hockey mask did not remain untouched. Since continuity became a part of the design, Jason now had a large, bloody crack in the mask as a result of the axe blow to the face at the end of Part 3. This addition might seem like a cosmetic addition, but in reality, it told a story. Jason's mask told Jason's story, bearing all the scars he had endured throughout the franchise. In the final chapter, stuntman Ted White portrayed Jason on screen, giving the killer a more menacing and physical presence. The damage to the mask added realism to the story, suggesting that Jason was not invulnerable yet. The filmmakers did everything that they could to ensure that the story remained consistent, even when there were so many murders. This was Jason's murder spree era, to be honest. He was brutal, fast-moving, and unstoppable with every kill. And the mask mirrored the same journey. It was dirtier, more weathered, and started to look less like a piece of disguise and more like armor. Then came Part 5, A New Beginning. This one gave us the most divisive twist of the entire franchise. Jason was not the killer. Roy Burns was a grief-stricken paramedic. This man had a hockey mask too, but with blue chevrons instead of white, a lot cleaner and brighter. For fans, this change looked jarring, but from a narrative point of view, it made sense. The mask was symbolic. It separated Roy's fake Jason from the real deal, and the fans noticed these little visual clues. And as you guys can guess, fans did not like it. The backlash was brutal. As far as the fans were concerned, there was only one Jason. So then came the 6th part, titled Jason Lives, Friday the 13th Part 6, in which the man came back to life with a jolt of lightning. This movie had a huge tonal shift, as Jason was now a supernatural zombie. This tonal shift was undoubtedly something, as the backward psycho was gone. Now Jason was in his full-on undead slasher mode, and his mask mirrored that too. It looked older and more faded, and had more cracks. The red chevron was almost worn out. His whole appearance was a grim upgrade, with decaying flesh and all. Actor C.J. Graham portrayed Jason in this installment, and he played Jason with a stiff, robotic menace that brought something new to the table. The mask started to feel more mythic than ever. It was now a symbol of Jason's eternal return, and in one scene, we see Jason's mask split, exposing his maggot-filled flesh underneath. This version of the mask became a relic from a horror legend. Gone was the clean, repurposed goalie mask. Instead, now we had something grotesque and storied. The mask became a part of the mythos. The Rotting Mask of the Undead, Parts 7 to 8, The New Blood to Jason Takes Manhattan. In Friday the 13th Part 7, The New Blood 1988, Jason's transformation was complete. He was now a walking corpse. Any signs of humanity were completely gone. His mask was cracked, waterlogged, and barely holding together. And even that could not hide the monster underneath. This version of Jason has to be the most gory version of Jason in the entire franchise, and the mask simply adds to the visual effect. Kane Hodder made his first big-screen appearance as Jason and brought an intensity and physicality to the villain that is simply unmatched. His performance showed the brutality of Jason with every deliberate movement and explosive kill. The makeup department matched that brutality with a mask that told its own story. This time around, the hockey mask was no longer a mask for Jason. It had fused to his skull. Sections were missing, exposing the skeletal jaw and broken teeth under it. Even the best plastic surgeon could not reconstruct Jason's face from the looks of it. And the mask? It clung to him like it was afraid of letting go. The visual continuity was marvelous to witness, as it added more layers of horror to Jason. Jason was now fusing with the mask instead of simply wearing it. After he was shocked by telekinesis and dragged underwater, Jason's new look in New Blood screamed of rot, bone, and unstoppable fury. This mask showed Jason's state, worn down but not broken. After that, we got Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan in 1989. Instead of being in the woods, Jason was now in the city. The premise of this movie is cheesy, and the film is often criticized for it. But when you look at Jason, oh my god, the design of Jason in this movie is truly terrifying. His body is entirely drenched, and his flesh is rotting off him. His mask is completely warped from water damage, and from the looks of it, it looked like it had been underwater for a very long time, which was not far off when you look at the continuity. For me, what stood out the most was the deterioration. The mask looked smaller now and tighter. It looked like his skin had grown over it. The iconic red chevrons were barely visible, and the eye holes were hollow and more lifeless than ever. Jason was no longer wearing the mask, he was the mask. Hodder had to wear a full prosthetic suit with the mask included to show the decay properly. This design helped elevate Jason's look beyond the typical slasher fare. He was now this immortal spirit of vengeance who was barely held together by his bones, muscles, and skin. The only thing that connected him to his original identity was his iconic hockey mask. A New Look in Hell. Jason Goes to Hell, 1993. Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Friday, has to be the strangest entry in the franchise. This movie came out in 1993, and with Adam Marcus in the director's chair, this film did something that was absolutely and completely unexpected. In the first 10 minutes of the movie, we see the SWAT team literally blow Jason to dust. No, I'm not kidding. He is literally ripped apart. Now, with the main antagonist gone, you'd think that the movie wouldn't work, right? Nope. Instead, in the entire movie, Jason's ghost keeps possessing other people. This is an experimental approach to the typical slasher movie. It was nothing like the movies that came before it. While we don't get to see Jason on screen much, we do see the blackened, burnt, and fused hockey mask on the screen several times. This version of the mask is no longer an armor or an iconography. At this point, this is a part of Jason. The latex mask that Kane Hodder wore showed the mask completely embedded into his swollen and deformed skull. The years of rot, damage, and supernatural trauma had permanently bonded them together. The visual was grotesque, and, well, it worked. This aesthetic shift was deliberate and noticeable. This Jason was someone who had been killed several times, and now his face could not exist without the mask. The filmmakers used the mask to make it evidently clear that Jason was not a man. He was now a myth, a curse, a demonic entity whose powers were rooted in the mask. The iconic chevrons were now barely visible, and the hockey mask that used to be white and symbolic of blank menace now looked ancient and cursed. The mask now represented the mutation of everything that had come before this movie. Even the title sequence of the movie treats the mask as sacred. The movie states that it would explore Jason's soul more than his machete. And say what you want about the body hopping plot, it was ambitious, to say the least. This movie also showed that Jason's power came from this hellish force and could be transferred through this demonic slug. Despite being weird as an idea, visually, this supported the lore. It made sense why the mask would fuse with the skin in a mythological aspect, now that we know it's a vessel for evil. Behind the scenes, the makeup team worked really hard to maintain the silhouette of the mask while they made it more grotesque with the organic fusion. The lack of screen time for our boy Jason definitely hurts my soul as a diehard Jason fan, but the burned and embedded mask of the movie leaves a lasting impression. It tells you everything that you need to know about Jason. He is a monster who has given up his identity long ago. Cyber Jason. Jason X, 2002. But even Jason Goes to Hell has to bow down to Jason X, which is the most ridiculous entry in the franchise. Released in 2002, this movie shows our very own slasher, Jason Voorhees, going to space. Fans were initially, understandably, skeptical about the whole sci-fi setting, but the movie leaned hard into the absurd, and so did Jason's mask. At first, we had the iconic gritty hockey mask, but soon enough, we get Uber Jason with his metallic cyberpunk facelift. In the beginning half of the movie, Jason is the same old dude. His mask is damaged and grimy. After being cryogenically frozen and revived aboard a spaceship after centuries, Jason starts killing everyone after donning the very same mask. However, he ended up in this medical bay when he died, where a bunch of nanobots, meant to heal injuries, sensed his human DNA and rebuilt him from scratch. They upgrade him completely. This is Uber Jason. His new mask has a metallic, angular, and razor-sharp design. The eye holes are narrow, and the grimy aesthetic is swapped out for high-tech menace. Now, this mask is more like a helmet. This new design was handled exceptionally well by the FX artist Steven Dupuis. They wanted to create something that felt futuristic, but still had the undeniable Jason charm to it. So he removed the chevron and added rigid metal and robotic plating. Some fans felt that this was taking too many creative liberties, and they were straying further and further away from the original idea. But other fans enjoyed the creativity. Under the mask, we had Kane Holder returning again to portray Jason. His bulk and posture really helped sell the new look, and Uber Jason did not just kill, he demolished. Jason X has to be that movie in the entire franchise, which is so bad, it's good. The mask change is one of the many things that make this movie so memorable. The evolution of the mask from a cracked mask to a sleek metal one shows how the genre is also evolving from slasher horror to campy sci-fi action. Symbolically speaking, this Uber Jason mask represented something fans already knew. Jason cannot be killed. No matter what you do, he will always come back shinier and scarier. The mask may change, but the menace, it remains. A brutal return. Freddy vs. Jason 2004. 2 years later, in 2004, we got Freddy vs. Jason after years of rights disputes and fan speculation. This finally gave us the slasher standoff we'd been waiting for all these years. This movie pitted two of horror's most iconic killers against each other. And of course, Jason had to be on his A game. He needed to look his most menacing ever, and his mask played a huge role in that. In this movie, Ken Kirzinger played Jason, and he made this villain a lot more somber, slower, and bigger. He's not like a twitchy zombie, the Jason from parts 6 to 8. Instead, he's more like this lumbering executioner, ready to kill anyone who stands in his way. The hockey mask in this movie is aged and yellowed with a bone-like texture, but it was relatively intact. It was grounded, angry, and old. The mask is definitely larger in size and sits loosely on top of Kirzinger's face. The red triangles, albeit faded along with the rounded edges and no visible straps, make it look like the mask is simply hovering over his face. The mask does not have the sharp contours of the previous designs, but it maintains the intimidating, soulless expression that Jason is beloved for. Director Ronnie Yu specifically wanted Jason to feel tragic. He wanted to portray Jason as a juggernaut manipulated by Krueger. This time, Jason is the weapon, and the mask reflects that dynamic. It looks less like the horror iconography and more like a muzzle this time around. Throughout the film, the mask is a silent witness to carnage, and when Freddy taunts Jason by donning the mask himself, we realize how iconic the mask truly is. Even Freddy knew that the only way to channel unstoppable power was to wear Jason's mask. In short, this movie gave us the version of the mask that was completely stripped down to its very essence. It did not need any enhancements, it was simply enough. The Reimagined Mask, Friday the 13th, 2009. In 2009, Platinum Dunes decided they wanted to reboot the franchise for a modern audience. Marcus Nispel directed this gritty and brutal remake, which was surprisingly efficient. The movie borrowed heavily from the first 4 entries of the franchise, but they managed to give Jason and his mask a faithful and fresh makeover. Derek Mears gave Jason a fresh look as well. His Jason was faster, smarter, and more predatory. He laid out traps. He stalked victims. He was a hunter, and his hockey mask reflected that grounded menace. At first, Jason wears a sack, echoing the look from Part 2. It's a respectful nod to the character's origins. However, soon, he kills a character who owns a hockey mask, and Jason tries it on. As he looked at himself wearing the mask, he looked like he had discovered his identity, and that was a key moment. The mask was not a disguise. The mask somehow helped him reclaim his legend. The 2009 mask is heavier, thicker, and more textured. It's weathered, but it's symmetrical. The deep brow lines give Jason a permanent scowl. But despite that, this looks like something Jason could have actually found and repurposed. The reveal of the mask is akin to a superhero donning their costume for the first time, and rightly so. This is the moment when Jason becomes Jason again. This mask also strikes the right balance between realism and nostalgia in terms of design. The mask feels both old and new, and that's truly what we want. The 2009 movie redefined Jason, and the mask served as a perfect bridge for that. Marvelous verdict. Over the years, Jason's mask has evolved just like him. From sackcloth to cybernetic armor, this mask is as violent and unpredictable in its evolution as the killer who wears it. This hockey mask is a symbol. It's a symbol of a backwoods manic killer turning into a pop culture icon. Whether the mask is dirty, grimy, gritty, or cracked, it always says the same thing: Jason is coming for you. Personally, my favorite iteration of the mask has to be the Uber Jason one. What about you guys? Which one do you guys like? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!